My Bitcoin price prediction was way too low. A huge cash tsunami is coming that will flow into Bitcoin. These are the shocking new statements from Fred Krueger. He makes it clear in his statements why we've all been betting way too low and that Bitcoin can explode in price much more wildly than previously thought. Because he's talking about the TradFi market. He really knows his stuff here. When you have a megatrend like Bitcoin, you don't have to be smart, according to him, to make money from it. And he warns against having too low Bitcoin allocations. You guys really need to check this out. He says 1.5%, 2% Bitcoin allocation is way too low because we have a megatrend coming our way. And here too, he is not talking about the classic price catalysts, such as he's not talking about the Trump reserve currency or the fact that we have new fiat liquidity. Instead, he's talking about the TradFi market and that there's a wave rolling in on us in the TradFi market that nobody has on their radar right now. We're going to take a look at his statements because they're explosive but also extremely shocking. We will also come to his price target. He sees a 40-fold increase as relatively conservative. I'll also share my take on it, but for now, just soak it all in.
This is the math that I think is really important. You've got $100 trillion of assets in TradFi, and $100 billion worth of assets are deployed in a way that can be tapped into by TradFi. 100 billion, okay, yeah. So that's 1/10 of 1%. Yeah. What's the chance that 1/10 of 1% goes to 1%? There's a 100% chance that we're going to go from 1/10 of 1% to 1%. And we'll probably go from 1% to 5%. Ultimately, that's right, and maybe even more. Well, that's a 10-fold increase in terms of money invested in this thing. That means the price of Bitcoin is going to shoot up 40 times. Exactly. We're going to jump from 1 trillion to 41 trillion in market cap, which means about $2 million per Bitcoin. So you can see that the sheer math is just incredible, right? And what did I leave out of that? I didn't factor in the rest of the world. I didn't include China. I didn't include Europe. I didn't include any of that. I didn't include real estate usant.
TradFi's 100 trillion assets, 201 billion for Bitcoin, 0.1% now, may grow to 5%. He's basically talking about the TradFi sector, like the stock market, exchange-traded funds, and those kinds of traditional investments. He simply says there are approximately 100 trillion available assets in the TradFi market, but out of those 100 trillion, only about 200 and 100 billion can even potentially be allocated to Bitcoin right now. So, there are companies or investors from the TradFi market saying, okay, we're currently ready to invest in Bitcoin, and that's just 0.1% of the TradFi market that can potentially invest in Bitcoin or has already invested in it. According to his assessment, that's going to expand from a minimum of 0.1% to 5%, but there's nothing stopping it from going well beyond 5%. And this would mean that we would see a 40-fold increase in the price of Bitcoin. He's assuming a current market capitalization of 1 trillion. Of course, we're already a bit above that, but people often just use the trillion figure because it's easier to calculate. So that means we would have a Bitcoin price of $2 million if we see a 40-fold increase, at least according to Fred Krueger's math here. The numbers here, as I said, are not entirely correct because he has set the market capitalization a little too low and then he would actually come to less than 2 million. But if you take the original market capitalization, then you actually end up over $2 million. And that's definitely the message that a ton of money is going to be allocated to Bitcoin from the TradFi market. And there are no real estate assets included, nor China, Europe, or other markets. None of that is factored into this calculation. It's really just about the TradFi market. And that is something that very, very few people are aware of because many people just watch, for example. Okay, is Donald Trump setting up a Bitcoin reserve? Is the US expanding the money supply? Are there liquidity programs happening in China? Is Europe bringing new liquidity into the market? But according to them, the TradFi market is massively undervalued.
There's a tidal wave of cash, a tidal wave of money that's going to want to flow into this asset, The big story here is asset allocation and just the sheer size of the flows we're looking at. I think that's just incredible, and I really don't think Bitcoiners understand how massive it is. They really don't, And to give another example, there's $6 trillion just sitting in money markets out there. 6 trillion. That's insane. They really don't, And to give another example, there's $6 trillion just sitting in money markets out there. 6 trillion. That's wild. I mean, could we see 20% of that going into Bitcoin? Sure, why not? Without even a single cent coming from real estate or the QQQs or anything else, right? And this doesn't even include any future growth of the money supply. Yeah, so I'm just saying like I cut down every single thing by 5x and I'm still getting that this thing's going to north of 1 million very, very easily, right?
He makes it clear again that a tsunami of money will flow into Bitcoin because, of course, more and more investors, also from the TradFi market, will understand the qualities that Bitcoin has here. And right now, the understanding just isn't there. It's still got a bad reputation, and there's a lot of fake news out there. People don't really know what Bitcoin is all about. But there's definitely easier access to information now. More and more information about Bitcoin is getting out there, and I'd say the truth is spreading, or maybe truth is too strong a word, but the information around Bitcoin is definitely becoming more widespread. And that's why he's talking about a tsunami of money, because Bitcoin has some of the best qualities of a store of value. And now it's just a matter of time until the TradFi market experiences or realizes this. And he says nobody understands how big it is, nobody gets the massive price potential of Bitcoin. He gives another example that there are 6 trillion sitting in money market funds, and at least 20% of that could flow into Bitcoin. And if you add it all up, you easily get prices of well over 1 million. And he even says that he's being very, very conservative in his calculations. That's also the point here. The theme is that he underestimated how much higher the Bitcoin price can actually go compared to what he originally thought. He says he's doing his calculations and analysis 5 times lower, so 5 times more conservatively than what you could actually expect. So what he's talking about isn't the bullish case, it's just the base case or maybe even the bear case. He says that he does his calculations and his analysis 5 times lower, i.e. 5 times more conservative, than one might actually assume here. Bitcoin prices over 1 million is ultra bullish. Bitcoin must quickly rise to 1 million. Of course, one has to be honest and say that Bitcoin prices are well over 1 million in this cycle, which is of course ultra bullish. And often in the Bitcoin space, people get trapped in their own thinking because they believe that once they recognize Bitcoin and understand it, Bitcoin has to shoot up to 1 million in just a few weeks and then to 10 million. That's just mind-blowing. But you can't forget that the mainstream is often very, very slow to catch on until it really sinks in for people and they actually get it. So yeah, from a Bitcoin perspective, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. But you can't forget that the mainstream is often really slow to catch on until it actually sinks in for people and they truly understand it. And that's why, from a Bitcoin perspective, everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. But you shouldn't underestimate things like the stupidity of people and the fact that folks are just busy with other stuff instead of investing or saving money, or maybe even standing up for a better and fairer world through Bitcoin.
I think this stuff is happening. This is the mega trend, you know? You don't need to be super smart when you're dealing with one of these mega trends. You just need to hop on board. And I think that's the message. Don't waste your time asking if it's going to hit 80K tomorrow or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's just irrelevant. We're heading towards a 7-figure Bitcoin price. That's what's going down. And now, you can either mentally get on board with that number. And if you do, you shouldn't just have a 1% allocation to Bitcoin, or 2%, or even 10%. Those numbers are way too low. I'm lucky that I kind of stumbled upon this, about 5 years ago. But it wasn't my first introduction to Bitcoin. I finally got the religion about 5 years back. Even if you get into it today, we're still super early in this whole process. I don't know. People are going to look back and be like, how the hell did you get into Bitcoin in 2024? Or do you mean 2,000 years?
And this is really one of his most relevant statements. He talks about Bitcoin being a megatrend. Megatrends don't need genius to profit. Invest in Bitcoin. If you understand the potential, invest more in Bitcoin. But on the other hand, you also have to understand that if you have a megatrend here, then it also makes sense to allocate very high allocations to Bitcoin. Now, this isn't meant to be financial advice, but he's clearly warning that if you get Bitcoin, if you understand what's going on right now, and if you see how much money could potentially flow into Bitcoin, then having just a small allocation to Bitcoin doesn't make sense. You really need to have a much higher allocation to Bitcoin. On the other hand, you could also say that even if you only have a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5% allocation to Bitcoin, if it really plays out the way a lot of people think, like hitting 2 million and going up to several $million in current purchasing power, then even with just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe even 10% allocation, you're still in a really good spot. But of course, the more you allocate, the better off you potentially are. And that's the question, okay, can you really understand Bitcoin? And if you get it, then there's really no other decision to make except to massively accumulate Bitcoin. And the right allocation is really individual. It depends on your own preferences. Like, are you single? Are you young? Are you old? And so on. But 2% is definitely far too little, according to Fred Krueger, if you at least understand it. I mean, if you don't get it, then maybe a 2% allocation is okay. But if you do understand it, then you definitely need a hefty allocation. According to him, we're definitely not too late. That's the misconception people always have. We are too late, the party is already over, it is all over, and in 10 or 20 years people will think, wow, back then you could buy Bitcoin for under US dollars. The people who bought Bitcoin back then must be geniuses. And now, if you're buying Bitcoin for 80, 90, or even 100,000, you're thinking, okay, I'm buying Bitcoin at an all-time high, this is way too high. And that's the misconception that Fred Krueger is warning about, and I totally agree with him on that. So we really have a very, very bullish forecast here. A lot of his statements are really spot on, in my opinion. Of course, when it comes to price targets and forecasts, it's always a bit tricky. You know, whether they're too high or too low, it's all variable. But the arguments you're making here are really spot on. That DeFi is going to come in, that more and more people are going to understand that it's not too late, and if you get it, you definitely should have a higher allocation. Even someone who might not be the sharpest tool in the shed can potentially benefit massively from this megatrend. You don't have to be ultra super smart, you just need to be a little bit smart, or maybe you don't even need to be smart at all. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place at the right time and focusing on the right things. Like, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for us. If you still want to buy Bitcoin, check out Bitcoin. There are a lot of newcomers right now, so definitely check out 21 Bitcoin. It's the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. In 2021, that's when you're really in the game and part of this megatrend. You can easily buy Bitcoin here, and with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you even get up to 20% off the fees when you buy Bitcoin. You can support our channel, and you'll get something out of it too. Let me know what you think about Fred Krueger's statements. Until then, peace out, 1000.